My name is Miller Files. I have spent most of my adult life studying the moments people wish they could rewind. I do not mean the dramatic moments that make headlines. I mean the quiet ones, the seconds where someone chooses not to lock a door because they have never needed to. The minutes where a parent assumes a child is asleep because the house is still. The ordinary choices that feel harmless until the night they are not. Some cases fade with time because the facts eventually form a shape you can hold. An arrest, a confession, a body. A timeline that resolves into a conclusion even when it is painful. Other cases do the opposite. They sharpen. They become cleaner and colder because the missing pieces stay missing. You reread them years later, and the questions sound louder than they did before. The disappearance of Asha Degree is one of those cases. When people tell this story quickly, they always lead with the same sentence. A 9-year-old girl walked out of her home in the middle of the night. That sentence has become a slogan, and slogans are dangerous. They make the impossible feel normal through repetition. They make you accept what you should be resisting. Asha Degree was 9 years old. She lived in Shelby, North Carolina. She had a family, a routine, school mornings, church days, and the kind of life that produces predictable patterns. Children like that do not drift into the dark for no reason. Not in winter, not in rain, not onto a road that adults would hesitate to walk even in daylight. The first time I read the file, what struck me was not just that she left. It was the way she left. No screaming, no forced entry, no shattered glass, no struggle. The house did not look like a crime scene. It looked like an ordinary home that had simply been betrayed by time. The second thing that struck me was that the case is built from a small number of hard facts and a large number of interpretations. That makes it a magnet for theories. People want to solve the discomfort by naming a villain, inventing a motive, or placing a neat ending on a story that refuses to end. I understand the impulse, but my job is not comfort, it is clarity. So here is how I will tell it. I will start with my voice, because that is the lens the listener has chosen. I am the one guiding you through the dark. Then I will step out of the way and lay down the timeline as cleanly as it can be laid down, hour by hour, decision by decision, based on what is known and what can reasonably be inferred. Finally, I will return at the end with professional judgment, not certainty, not closure, judgment. The difference matters, because in this case, the smallest details behave like fingerprints. A packed backpack, a child on a highway, a sudden run into the woods, a shed that offered brief shelter, a bag found far from home, wrapped and buried as if someone wanted to preserve it and forget it at the same time. Children do not bury their past, and that is why this case still breathes. Tonight, I want you to picture one thing before we move into the timeline. Picture the road, Highway 18, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through darkness. No sidewalks, sparse lighting, trees crowding the edges. The sound of trucks in the distance. Rain pushing sideways in the wind. Now place a 9-year-old child on that shoulder, walking alone with a backpack that feels too heavy for her frame. Ask yourself the question that sits at the center of this entire case. What story did she believe was waiting for her at the end of that road? That question is the reason we are still here. Now, we go step by step. February 13th, 2000 moves like an ordinary Sunday in a small American town. Asha is a child with a schedule. Family life, school expectations, church community. The kind of environment where adults assume safety because familiarity feels like protection. As night settles, The weather turns. Rain moves through the county. The temperature drops. The roads become slick and visibility worsens. This matters because it frames every decision that follows. A child stepping out into that night is stepping into a situation where even adults would be cautious. Sometime after midnight, the household is quiet. Asha's parents are asleep. Her brother is asleep. There is no reported disturbance that would suggest shouting, a fight, or a forced entry. The home does not present as an active crime scene. The absence of violence inside the house becomes one of the earliest anchors in the investigation. Between approximately 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. in the morning on February 14th, Asha leaves the home. She is not carried out. She is not dragged. She leaves on her own feet. The details that support this conclusion include the lack of forced entry, the lack of clear struggle, and later the existence of items indicating she traveled with a backpack. In many cases, a child leaving home at night would suggest a runaway scenario, but the context here resists that label. She is 9 years old. She is described as shy and cautious. There is no strong public indication that she had a pattern of running away. The environment outside is hostile. This combination pushes investigators to search for an explanation beyond simple rebellion. Asha's direction of travel becomes significant because of later witness accounts. She is believed to have walked along Highway 18. This is not a neighborhood street. It is a roadway where vehicles move quickly, where pedestrians are unusual, and where darkness and rain make visibility poor. The fact that she was there at all becomes part of the mystery. In the pre-dawn hours, 2 independent motorists report seeing a small figure walking along the highway. The first driver describes passing what he initially assumed was an adult with a slight frame. As he continued, something about the sight felt wrong. He turned around to check. This moment is pivotal. The driver's headlights approach the figure from behind. The child reacts immediately. She runs off the road into the woods. She does not approach the vehicle. She does not wave for help. She does not stand still. She flees from light and from the possibility of contact. The second motorist later reports a similar sighting in roughly the same area and time window. Different witness, similar description. A small figure alone moving along the highway in the rain. Consistency between witnesses strengthens the likelihood that Asha was indeed on that road. After these sightings, the trail becomes fragmented. Law enforcement and volunteers organize search efforts. Dogs, deputies, community members, they focus on the area around the highway because it is the last confirmed location where she was seen alive. During the search, items are found in the woods, small objects that appear consistent with a child's belongings, candy wrappers, a pencil, a hair bow. These are not dramatic pieces of evidence, but they function like breadcrumbs. They suggest presence, movement, and perhaps stress, because items do not end up scattered without a reason. Further into the wooded area, an old shed becomes part of the case narrative. Investigators find signs that someone had been inside recently. The details publicly described are modest. Not a violent scene, not blood, not clear signs of assault. Instead, evidence that a person may have sheltered there briefly. If Asha reached this shed, it implies she survived outside after leaving the road. It implies decision-making. She moved from open exposure into cover. She found a structure. She used it, at least for a short time. This is where time becomes an enemy. A child in cold rain cannot remain safe for long. Hypothermia, exhaustion, panic, injury. The longer she remains outside, the more likely she would either seek help or be incapacitated. Yet there is no confirmed sighting of her emerging later. No confirmed reports of a child knocking on doors. No confirmed emergency call that captures her voice. Days pass. The case expands. Tips arrive. Many unreliable, some sincere. The community watches, then waits. Law enforcement continues, but the evidence does not develop into a clear path. The case becomes what investigators call a mystery, without a body and without a definitive crime scene. Then, 18 months later, a new physical fact enters the record. A construction crew finds a backpack buried near a construction site along another highway, roughly 40 miles from Shelby. The backpack is identified as Asha's. It is wrapped in plastic. The wrapping suggests intent. It suggests an attempt to protect the bag from weather and soil. It suggests that whoever placed it there did not simply discard it in panic. Distance matters. 40 miles is not a casual drift for a 9-year-old on foot. The burial is also not an act associated with a child. The combination of distance and concealment shifts the investigation's center of gravity. Asha may have left home on her own, but the backpack's condition strongly implies that someone else handled her belongings after she disappeared. At that point, investigators must interpret what the backpack represents. If it was buried soon after the disappearance, it suggests rapid concealment. If it was held for months and buried later, it suggests prolonged possession and a decision made over time. Either way, it establishes adult behavior. Wrapping, transporting, selecting a location, and burying require planning and calm. From here, the case enters its long, cold phase. The public sees periodic updates. The family continues living in the shadow of uncertainty. The record remains open. The central known facts remain stubbornly limited. Asha left home in the early hours. She was seen on Highway 18. She ran into the woods. Some personal items were found. Her backpack was later found buried far away, wrapped as if someone wanted to preserve it and hide it at once. That is the timeline as cleanly as it can be told. The rest is interpretation. Now I return to my voice, because the timeline alone does not explain the weight of this case. A sequence of events can be true and still fail to be meaningful. Meaning is built from behavior, from the way a person responds to fear, from the way a child responds to light, from the way an adult responds to evidence. There are 3 behaviors in this case that refuse to sit comfortably beside innocent explanations. The first is intentional departure. Asha did not wander out by accident. The packed backpack is the loudest signal. Packing is a future-oriented act. It implies that the person believes they are going somewhere and that the destination requires preparation. Even if the items were small, the concept is large. A 9-year-old who packs a bag at night is acting on a plan, not a whim. The second behavior is flight from perceived help. On Highway 18, headlights came toward her, and she ran into the woods. That reaction matters because it contradicts the simplest narrative. A lost child typically seeks an adult. A frightened child typically seeks safety. Light often equals safety. Asha treated light as danger. That does not automatically mean she was running from a good person. It means that in her mind, contact was risky. She may have been instructed to avoid cars. She may have feared punishment. She may have believed she was not supposed to be seen. Or she may have realized in that instant that something about her plan had gone wrong and she needed to hide. But the key is this. She did not stand still and hope to be rescued. She chose concealment. The third behavior is what happened after. The backpack was found far from home, wrapped in plastic and buried. This is adult behavior. It is controlled. It is deliberate. It suggests that someone had the bag, understood that it mattered, and decided to hide it in a way that would delay discovery. People often ask me which theory I believe. I do not believe in theories the way the internet does. I believe in probabilities shaped by behavior. Accidental exposure is possible in the early hours. A child in rain can get disoriented, can slip, can suffer hypothermia. But exposure does not explain burial. Exposure does not transport a backpack 40 miles. Exposure does not wrap evidence in plastic. A random stranger abduction on the roadside is possible in the abstract, but it clashes with the observed behavior. Asha ran from a car. If a stranger tried to stop her, she demonstrated a strong avoidance response. Could someone still have caught her later? Yes, but then we face the problem of the shed and the lack of sightings afterward. A roadside abduction is chaotic and risky. The concealment of the backpack suggests someone who had enough calm to manage risk. A prearranged meeting is the hypothesis that aligns most tightly with the known behaviors. The packed bag suggests expectation. The late hour suggests secrecy. The walk to a specific road suggests a destination beyond the home. And yet the flight into the woods suggests that whatever she expected did not unfold smoothly. Something changed, a variable entered that she did not anticipate. A car turned around. A sound startled her. A person arrived who was not who she thought, or the person she intended to meet approached in a way that triggered fear rather than trust. If grooming occurred, it likely began somewhere safe and familiar. Children are rarely recruited in public darkness. They are recruited in daylight, in ordinary places, through repeated contact that turns trust into leverage. School, church, neighborhood, family connections, community events. The exact venue cannot be asserted without evidence, but the pattern fits the psychology of how children are persuaded to keep secrets. This is the part where I am careful. Professional judgment is not an accusation. It is a statement about what the evidence suggests. What the evidence suggests is that Asha left the home under her own power, but not necessarily under her own idea. She likely carried a narrative that made sense to her, a story built by someone else or built from something she misunderstood. She moved into an environment that quickly became dangerous. She avoided help and sought concealment. And at some point after the shed, another person intervened because her belongings later traveled far and were hidden with care. When I say that, I can already hear the next question. Who? The honest answer is that I do not know. The file does not give me a single name I can say with certainty, but it gives me a profile of behavior. It suggests someone with access to transportation, someone comfortable enough with the region to choose a burial site that would not draw attention, someone who understood the value of the backpack as evidence, someone who could act without panic. It may have been a person already in the periphery of Asha's life, or a person who learned her routines through proximity. It may have been someone who leveraged authority, kindness, or familiarity. The lack of a public violent struggle is consistent with many child abductions because children can be moved through compliance. A calm voice can be more effective than force. The case also warns us about the limits of early assumptions. When a child disappears, people want a category: runaway, accident, stranger, abduction, family, involvement. Those labels shape where you look and how you interpret tips. In Asha's case, the category never fit cleanly, and that may be part of why the case became so hard. When the truth does not match a familiar template, it can slip through the cracks between protocols. If you want one professional conclusion that does not overreach, it is this: Asha Degree's disappearance contains multiple indicators of planning and concealment that are inconsistent with a simple accident. Whatever began with a child walking into the rain did not remain a child's story for long. An adult hand entered the narrative, and the backpack buried 40 miles away is the most concrete sign of that hand. I wish I could give you the ending the family deserves. I cannot. What I can give you is the reason this case still matters. It matters because it is not just about one night in 2000. It is about how easily a child can be moved by a story, how quickly secrecy becomes a weapon, and how hard it is to retrieve the truth once it has been carried away from the road where it started. My name is Miller Files, and this is a case that still waits for the right question asked of the right person at the right time. If you stay with the timeline long enough, it starts to feel less like a straight line and more like a narrowing corridor. The farther you walk into it, the less room there is for coincidence. In Asha Degree's case, the corridor narrows around three places: the home, Highway 18, and the gap that opens after the shed. The home is where the case begins, and it begins quietly. That quiet matters. In the early morning hours of February 14th, there is no confirmed chaos inside the house, no broken window, no forced door, no neighbors reporting yelling. Whatever happened next, it did not start with a violent interruption that woke the family. The absence of force inside the house does not prove there was no coercion, but it does reduce the likelihood of a stranger physically entering and removing a child without leaving obvious disturbance. That leaves us with the most unsettling possibility: the child left with her own hands and her own feet. Asha's departure is not only unusual because of her age, it is unusual because it looks intentional. She dressed, she took a backpack. Those actions are small, but they are organized. In many missing child cases, the first question is where the child went. In this one, the first question is why she believed she needed to go at all. The weather is the second layer of pressure. Rain and cold do not create motives, but they do expose motives. A child who leaves in cold rain is not simply choosing to walk outside. She is choosing discomfort, risk, and the possibility of being seen by drivers. That suggests she believed the reward at the end of her journey outweighed the cost. When the sightings appear, the corridor narrows again. Two independent motorists describe a small figure moving along Highway 18, alone, in the pre-dawn darkness. The value of independent witnesses cannot be overstated. In cases like this, many claims are contaminated by later publicity. These were early reports tied to a narrow time window. The witnesses did not know they were stepping into a mystery. They were reporting something that felt wrong on the road. The most revealing part is still the reaction. When a vehicle turned back, the child ran into the woods. I want you to hold on to that detail without romanticizing it. It is easy to hear it and imagine bravery. I do not hear bravery, I hear urgency. I hear an internal rule that says do not be seen, do not be approached, do not be questioned. Children do not invent rules like that in the middle of the night. Rules like that usually arrive through authority, through fear, or through a story that has been repeated enough to feel true. Once Asha leaves the road, the woods take over. The woods are not just a setting. They are a divider between public visibility and private vulnerability. On the shoulder of Highway 18, a child is exposed, but also potentially observable. In the woods, she is hidden from vehicles, but also hidden from help. Searchers later find small items. Each item is unimpressive on its own. Together, They act like a trail that does not end. Candy wrappers, a pencil, a hair bow, in a clean world, those objects would lead to a child. In this world, they lead to an empty shed and a question. The shed is where the timeline becomes most psychologically complex. The shed suggests shelter. Shelter suggests survival beyond the road. Survival suggests time. Time suggests choices. Either Asha spent time there and then moved on, or someone found her after she sought cover. The shed also suggests waiting. A child who runs into the woods to avoid headlights could keep running until she collapses. A child who finds a shed and stays long enough to leave signs behind is doing something else. She is making a decision to pause. She is choosing a place that keeps her out of the open while still allowing her to continue later. In other words, she is behaving like someone who believes there is a next step. That belief could be self-generated, but it would be unusual for a 9-year-old in those conditions. More often, belief is planted, a promised pickup, a planned meeting, a story about someone waiting. Even if the child's understanding is incomplete, the structure of the behavior still points toward expectation. After this point, the timeline becomes negative space. What is not seen becomes as important as what is seen. There is no confirmed report of Asha approaching a house in daylight. No confirmed call for help. No confirmed sighting on another road after sunrise. The search does not recover the kind of evidence that would be expected if a child had died of exposure near that area. Nature hides evidence, but total erasure is rare. Even when remains are not found, clothing, footwear, or scattered belongings often surface. Here, the evidence that should exist is missing. In that absence, investigators face two broad realities. Either the environment consumed all traces in a way that left nothing discoverable, or the child was removed from the environment by another person. Then, 18 months later, the case receives the most direct indication of removal. The backpack. A construction worker finds it buried near a different highway, roughly 40 miles from the child's home. It is wrapped in plastic. This is not a casual discard. A bag tossed out of a moving car ends up in weeds, not under soil. A bag discarded in panic ends up exposed, not preserved. Wrapping is a decision. Burial is a decision. Choosing a location is a decision. Decisions imply a decision maker. When I study cases, I pay attention to the difference between destruction and concealment. Destruction is emotional. Concealment is procedural. A person who destroys evidence is trying to erase a moment. A person who conceals evidence is trying to manage a future. The backpack, wrapped and buried, reads like management. It also reads like possession. Someone had the bag. Someone moved it. Someone delayed its discovery. Whether that person acted within hours or months, the behavior still signals control. And control is not a word you attach to the weather. Once the backpack enters the timeline, the corridor narrows to a sharp point. If Asha left the house of her own accord, that may only describe the first chapter. The second chapter belongs to someone else. Asha's story, as recorded by evidence, becomes the story of a child who began a journey alone and then had her belongings handled by an adult who knew enough to hide them. The timeline cannot tell us the name. It can tell us the shape of the act. Asha left. Asha was seen. Asha ran. Asha sheltered. And then something, or someone, interrupted the narrative so completely that the next solid fact we have is a bag buried 40 miles away. That is not randomness. That is a hand closing a door. This is the point in a documentary where people expect a neat reveal, a name, a face, a single sentence that turns the chaos into a solved equation. Real cases rarely give that gift. The disappearance of Asha Degree has endured precisely because it refuses to become simple. So I will give you the closest thing to closure that an honest investigator can offer, a disciplined conclusion built from what the evidence implies and what the evidence rejects. First, we separate what is emotionally satisfying from what is behaviorally consistent. Emotion wants to believe in a sudden tragedy that no one could have prevented. A child wandered out, got lost, and the night did the rest. That story allows everyone to remain innocent. But innocence is not the same as likelihood. Asha's actions indicate intention. She left at an unusual hour. She carried a backpack. She moved onto a major roadway rather than circling near her home. Those elements form a pattern of directed movement. Directed movement in a 9-year-old usually comes from one of two sources. Either the child believes she is following a plan, or the child is reacting to an immediate fear. In Asha's case, there is no clear sign of an emergency inside the home that forced her out in panic. The house was quiet. That leans the interpretation toward planning rather than flight. Second, we weigh the psychological meaning of the highway reaction. Asha ran from a vehicle that turned back. This is not a universal rule, but it is informative. A child who expects a friendly pickup may still be startled by the wrong car, the wrong voice, or the wrong timing. A child who has been warned not to trust strangers may also run. A child who believes she is breaking a rule may run. Each of those possibilities involves a narrative in her mind that is stronger than the natural instinct to seek help. That narrative is the invisible crime scene. It is the place where someone may have spoken to her, coached her, promised her something, or scared her into secrecy. You cannot photograph it, but you can infer it from behavior. Third, we confront the backpack. The buried backpack is the most powerful object in the case because it functions like a handprint on the timeline. It says, someone else intervened. It says, the journey continued beyond where searchers looked. It says, concealment. It says, planning. It says that the person who handled it had time, transportation, and enough presence of mind to wrap it. If you accept the backpack as an adult action, the range of plausible scenarios changes. The simplest accident becomes less likely. Exposure does not bury evidence. A child does not drive 40 miles. A random animal does not wrap plastic. So what remains? The most behaviorally consistent interpretation is this. Asha left home believing she was going to a specific outcome. Whether that outcome was a meeting, a surprise, a promise, or something she misunderstood, she behaved like she had a destination beyond the house. The highway sightings place her on a path. Her flight into the woods suggests a disruption, fear, or the presence of an unexpected variable. The shed suggests survival and waiting. Then, at some later point, an adult moved her belongings away from the area and concealed them. That interpretation does not require that Asha willingly entered a vehicle. It only requires that at some point she was encountered by a person who gained control of the situation. Control can be physical, but it can also be psychological. With children, psychological control is often enough. The question of who remains open, and I will not fill that emptiness with speculation dressed as certainty. But I can outline what the behavior implies about the person. They likely had access to a vehicle and a routine that placed them near the relevant roads. They were comfortable enough to stop and conceal an object without drawing attention. They either understood investigative behavior or they had common sense about what evidence means. They acted with calm, not with frantic improvisation, and they were close enough in time to the event to intersect with a child's movements in the darkest hours of the morning. There is another layer to this case that is harder to say out loud, but I will say it anyway because it is true in too many investigations. Communities often assume danger comes from outside, from strangers, from drifters, from unknown men in unknown cars. But children are most often harmed by people who are not unknown to them. Sometimes that familiarity is direct. Sometimes it is indirect. The kind of familiarity built through proximity and repeated contact. A coach, a church acquaintance, a neighbor, a friend of a family member, a person who learns routines because they are always around. I am not naming anyone. I am naming a pattern. If grooming was involved, it would explain the secrecy, the timing, the packed bag, and the sense that Asha was following a private script. Grooming does not always look like affection. Sometimes it looks like authority. Sometimes it looks like a harmless secret. Sometimes it looks like a promise that feels bigger than a child's ability to evaluate risk. And this is why the case still matters, beyond the fact that a child is missing. It matters because the first stage of harm can be invisible. It can happen in daylight. It can happen in places we label safe. It can happen through words. In my work, I often return to the same uncomfortable lesson. The most dangerous weapon in a child's world is not always a knife or a gun. Sometimes it is a story that convinces them to step outside alone. When you listen to this case, do not only picture Highway 18, picture the earlier moments that no one recorded, the conversations no one heard, the instruction that may have sounded like kindness, the promise that may have sounded like adventure, the secret that may have sounded like trust, because if we ever learn the truth, it will likely begin there. Asha Degree is still missing. The file remains open. The community still carries the weight of that night. The family still carries a heavier weight. And I carry the same question that has never stopped bothering me. What story did she believe was waiting for her at the end of that road? My name is Miller Files. If that story was given to her by someone else, then somewhere, someone still knows the ending.